Today, it gives me great pleasure to introduce a speaker, not our normal speaker, under the age of what most are here, employed elsewhere. He's a house painter, but he's a pop fan, loves popular culture, and he's not into music. And as part of that, he's into places and things like Bettie Page. And we all know, basically, Bettie Page was a pinup girl. How many of us know much else about her? Oh, really? Really? Wow, look at that. Well, I read a book about it and thought, boy, we ought to hear about this in the History Club. So anyway, joining us today and sharing his enthusiasm about Bettie Page is Ben Wilkerson. Ben?
Thanks for the introduction. It's really cool to be here. This is my first time ever public speaking in my life, and I was pretty nervous until I saw this beautiful crowd. I mean, look at you guys. Come on. No, this is great. I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you about Bettie Mae Page. It's a subject that I'm very passionate about for several reasons, and I'll tell you all about that as we go along. Bettie Page, as most of you know, was the queen of the 1950s pinups, but she was also a Nashville native. Me personally, around 25, 30 years ago when I was in college, I was already a fan of Bettie Page. She was in the pop culture at the time. At that time, I realized, I think I read an article maybe in the Nashville scene, that she was from Nashville. I didn't know that. That blew my mind, so that made my fandom even bigger. I had a poster of hers in my dorm room, action figures, coffee mugs, but wow, she's from Nashville and she's not a country star. It was really exciting for me. I think she's a very fascinating figure from Nashville's past. And let's get started with, who was Bettie Page? Well, she was born on April 22nd, 1923 in Nashville. She died on December 11th, 2008 in Los Angeles. She was born to Roy and Edna Mae Page. That's her on the right there. She was the second of 6 children. Her childhood was not great, I'll be honest with you. They were broke. They were very poor. Her dad went to prison for a while. One point, her mother, while she was the sole caretaker, had to give the children up to an orphanage for a while. That's how bad it was. Around the age of 13, some darkness crept into Bettie's life. Her father was back in the picture, and he started abusing her. She kept that a secret all her life until her later years. It had a really bad effect on her. So it wasn't a great home life. But she did have a really supportive group of brothers and sisters. Here's a good picture of Bettie. She's in the center on the left there, and her sister Goldie in the center on the right, flanked by Jimmy and Jack. I believe that's at the Parthenon. Really good support group. They got along great, but they just made do what they could. She enrolled in Hume Fogg when it was time for high school, and she found out that every year, whoever graduated valedictorian, that person would get a full ride to Vanderbilt, full scholarship. Now that to her was very appealing. She came from no money, had really not a good chance to go to Vanderbilt otherwise. So she made it her goal to get that scholarship. She became a star student. It was her home away from home. That's where she spent all of her time. Here's a picture of Bettie on the right from the cover of the Hume Fogg Foghorn student newspaper when it was announced that she was the new co-editor of the newspaper. She was involved in the drama department and plays. And every time there was an article in the Tennessean about the upcoming plays at Hume Fogg, they always had Bettie's picture. She was active in everything. She was in every club she could be in. Now I want to read something to you right here, and I don't think this has ever been published before, so it's kind of cool. This will show you how sharp her mind was and how outspoken she was. It's a letter to the editor of the Tennessean, 1939. The Tennessean had written an article or an editorial about how they didn't approve how women wore bathing suits at public pools or at the beach. So Betty had something to say about that, and I'll read it out to you. Funny thing, to the editor, there have been so many letters in the forum regarding the shocking display of woman's body in such abbreviated attire as shorts or a bathing suit that I feel justified in speaking my piece. Certain specimens of the male element have written that a woman who allows her body to be so outrageously exposed is lower than a member of the canine family. Well, if that's the case, it's a funny thing to me that all men would walk 50 miles and break their necks to see a girl in her bathing suit. I don't think I've exaggerated in that last statement either. The male sex will sit up and talk about the opposite sex who show their legs, but I'd wager a bet that no man today would escort a woman clad in an outfit completely covered from head to toe, foot, along the beach. Signed, Bettie Page. Well, she was determined to get that scholarship. She wanted to be valedictorian more than anything in her life, and she missed it. She missed it by a fraction of a percentage point. But she got to be salutatorian. Now, with that honor, that came with a $100 scholarship to Peabody. Not quite a full ride to Vanderbilt, but she was grateful nonetheless. This is from the 1940 Hume Fogg yearbook, which I have a copy of. It's my pride and joy. On the top, in the center, you see Bettie Page, salutatorian, also voted most likely to succeed by her classmates. How awesome is that? This is a picture of the Hume Fogg graduating class of 1940. And since I have the yearbook, I realized just by associating faces that they sat in alphabetical order, left to right, row by row. So I found Betty in this picture, or at least I'm pretty sure I did. So I'm going to zoom in and show you. Right there circled, I'm pretty sure that's her because I would recognize that forehead anywhere. Here's a picture of Edna Mae, her mother, her sister Goldie on the left, and Betty on the right. So she was crushed about not getting the full ride to Vanderbilt, but she moved on. She went to Peabody. And once again, she was active in everything. Drama, clubs, theater, the newspaper staff, and she decided to be a teacher. She joined a sorority, and I'm about to show you a picture that's never been published. I'm pretty proud of this. I received it from a man after the historic marker was dedicated a few years ago. He sent it to me in the mail. It's a picture of Betty with her sorority. His mother was in the sorority with Betty. So there they are. And I don't know if you can find her. I'll give you a few seconds to look, but I'll zoom in and show you. Right there. Here's a Tennessean article. This just goes to show how active she was. She was part of a student production where they helped celebrate the Navajo Native American tribe. Here's an article from the Tennessean about a play at Peabody. There's Betty in the middle. This is a cool thing because on the bottom left, that Sutton is none other than Frank Sutton, who went on to star in Gomer Pyle. She was also active with the Nashville Community Theater at this time. This is a really cool thing right here. She worked as the personal secretary to Alfred Leland Crabbe. I'm sure a lot of you know who he was. Peabody professor and author. She actually was the person that transcribed 3 of his most popular books, Dinner at Belmont, Supper at Maxwell House, and Breakfast at the Hermitage. She transcribed those from his handwritten manuscripts. She spent a lot of time with Alfred Leland Crabbe and his wife. They treated her really well. His wife kind of spoiled her. They would invite her over for the weekends, and she tells stories later in life about how spoiled she was by them. But she found out pretty quickly that she didn't want to teach. There's a good reason for this. She couldn't control the men, the boys. She could not control the boy students, and it just did not work out. And she said, you know what? I'm not going to teach. I can't handle it. In 1943, speaking of males, she married Billy Neal. She met him pretty soon after graduating high school. He was a local star athlete. And when they got married in 1943, they decided to go as far as they could go with the money they had to get married. They didn't want to get married in Nashville. Let's see how far we can go. Well, they made it to Gallatin. They got married at the Gallatin courthouse. Here's a pretty neat fact about that. The county clerk in Sumner County at the time was none other than former Major League Baseball star Hub Purdue. Whoops, sorry. And Hub Purdue actually recalled later in life that he remembered marrying them. He remembered Betty. She graduated, still didn't want to teach. Billy found out that he was going to deploy to the South Pacific. He was in the Army. So they moved to San Francisco. While he was deployed, Betty worked various secretarial jobs. She started doing screen tests for television and movies. Nothing really panned out though. And during this time, with Billy out of the picture, she realized I didn't want to marry him. She realized she really wasn't in love with him. So when he got home, she told him. It didn't go over well with him. He went back to Nashville. And she went to Miami for a while. After being there for a little while, she went to New York City. While in New York City, she worked more various secretarial jobs, but she still wanted to be an actress. She decided, this is what I want to do. She auditioned for plays, she took classes. But around this time, some more darkness came into her life. I believe she was in Queens, and she was sexually assaulted by a group of men. She thought they were going to kill her. She got away. She came back to Nashville for a little while to be with her family to recover from that, and then New York City was calling her back. She really wanted to be an actress. She really wanted to be on plays, so she went back to New York City. Now I want to point out, there's a movie called Notorious Bettie Page. It came out in 2005. It got that scene wrong. They got a lot of scenes wrong. They got a lot of facts wrong. They got a lot of facts right too. But in that movie, they had that incident with the men in Queens happening in Nashville, and kind of used it as that's why she left Nashville kind of thing. No, it happened in Queens, so I've got Nashville's back on that. In 1950, fate stepped in. Sometimes you're in the right place at the right time. She was walking along the beach on Coney Island, probably wearing a bikini, and up comes a amateur photographer and New York City policeman named Jerry Tibbs. He approached her, very kind, said, "Have you ever considered pinup modeling?" She really hadn't. She liked acting. She liked regular modeling, but not pinup modeling. He said, "You would be great at it, trust me." They formed a friendship, and he's the person that convinced her to cut her bangs. That's where the trademark bangs came from. There's Jerry Tibbs right there on the inset.
He was not a black man?
He was.
Oh, he was.
Yes. Mm-hmm. But most importantly, he introduced her to the camera clubs. Now let me tell you how the camera clubs worked. A model would go in, there would be a group of anywhere from 10, 20, maybe even 30 amateur photographers, and they would just start taking pictures. Now these pictures were supposed to be for personal use and for practice. That's how they skirted some of the New York laws. But that wasn't really always the case. Some of these pictures eventually made their way into publications, and of course, as you can imagine, Betty was very popular with the camera clubs. That popularity led to some photo sessions. She started very slowly getting published, but then she caught the attention of a magazine publisher named Robert Harrison. He saw some of those camera club pics, and he said, "I want this. I want her. I want this girl to be in my magazines." He published, I believe, Eiffel, Wink, Beauty Parade, pretty big selling pinup magazines. And next thing you knew, she became a cover girl. Here she is on the cover of Eiffel. There she is on another Male Life. I'm not sure if that was a Harrison publication or not, but it's probably around the same time. And others came calling. She started making waves in the pinup community, in the photography community. Now, she still had the dream of being an actress. That was what she wanted to do. But this was good money. She was making great money doing this, and she enjoyed it. She really enjoyed it. Now, with this picture pulled up, I'd like to point something out. Betty was not just a great model. She was a really good designer of clothing. She designed her own pinup outfits, And they were really innovative. They were designs that had never really been seen before. So she was kind of like a double threat. She had a fresh new face, but she also was wearing outfits that nobody else had. And a lot of those designs inevitably got stolen by other designers. She was doing well. She was in demand. Things were going great. Still doing camera clubs. She was becoming a super hot item. Then she was introduced to Irving and Paula Claw. Let me tell you about the Claws. I'm sure some of you definitely know a lot about them. They had a New York City storefront called Movie Star News. Now, Movie Star News sold initially pictures of movie stars, 8x10 glossy kind of stuff. Irving and Paula noticed that some of the top selling photos to very specific customers were pictures of actresses in movies getting, I don't know, like tied to railroad tracks, tied to a chair, from Western movies, from crime movies. And eventually some of those same customers were like, could you guys produce more pictures like this? This is what I like. So they did. Here's a picture of Betty on the left with Paula Claw right there. Paula was Irving's sister, by the way. So they started making these commission photos for customers with specific tastes, and let's face it, it was fetish photography, bondage photography, the racy under-the-counter stuff. By the way, fun fact, this is the poster I had on my wall in the college. So when my parents would come visit, I would replace it with like a Pearl Jam poster or something, I don't know. But keep in mind, as racy as these photos were and provocative, there was no nudity. Betty quickly became the top-selling and most requested model of those kind of pictures. They took thousands of photos of Betty. Many of those are now iconic, like this one. They made short films. These customers would come up with ideas for little 16mm short films, and they would film them. Betty had a ton of fun making these, she recalled later in life. She said they were goofy. They were lighthearted. They were fun. And of course, it was all women involved. And Paula, since she was in charge, you know, she made them feel really safe. It was a safe place to shoot those films. Betty's serious and dominating looks in those poses and in those films have been copied over and over and over ever since in modeling and fashion. But keep in mind, these pictures were G-rated. Well, maybe PG-13 or something like that. But there was no nudity. And she saw nothing wrong with it. She didn't really understand why some of these people were into boots or gloves or whips, but she didn't question it. She's like, to each their own. If it makes them happy, it makes me happy. And she loved working with the Claws. Now, I just want to drive the point home here. She still wanted to be an actress. She was still pursuing that. She hadn't really given up that dream at this point. And she was making claw films, making 16mm fetish films, but that wasn't acting. I mean, that was just goofy fun to her. She did land some small parts in some local commercials. She did have a part at one point on the Jackie Gleason show, and apparently that footage just doesn't exist. I wish it would show up. But nothing really led to anything bigger on that end. In 1952, she got asked to appear in a burlesque motion picture called Strip-O-Rama. Now, Strip-O-Rama made some pretty good waves because it starred Lily St. Cyr. She was a big deal. She was a big burlesque performer. Betty had a pretty small part in this picture, but most importantly, what came out of this movie in her life was that Irving Claw saw it. And he thought, well, I can make a picture. I can do that. I've already got my models, and let's make our own picture. So in 1954, Irving Claw produced Varieties. It also starred Lily St. Cyr. But Betty had a bigger role in this one. This was like vaudeville. This was burlesque vaudeville. There was a song and dance number. There was comedy. And it did well enough that Irving Claw decided to make another one, Teaser-Rama. Now, Teaser-Rama is now considered a burlesque classic. It's the standard for 1950s burlesque films, and it starred Tempest Storm. Tempest Storm was a big deal. She was pretty famous. She was actually on the cover of gossip magazines at the checkout counter at that time. And it was great. And Betty had a really big role in this film as well. This movie also starred Joe Ross from Car 54. This was pre-Car 54. I'd like to show you a little clip just so you can get an idea of just how fun this picture is and was. So here we go. How racy was that? And as you can imagine, Betty came up with that dance all on her own. It was not choreographed, but they just had a ball doing this stuff. Just a little aside here, I want to point out that she was becoming successful at this time completely on her own. She had no manager, she had no agent. She made her own contacts, she negotiated her own contracts. There wasn't much negotiation. It was just, do you want to do this or not? But, I mean, she had really good business sense. And that good business sense led to the next thing that happened in her life, a very good development. She went to Miami and met a photographer named Bunny Yeager. Now, Bunny Yeager was a photographer, a pinup photographer, and her and Betty working together, you could say like they were a dynamic duo. They were almost like the Lennon and McCartney of the pinup world. The magic that they created together is just unparalleled. They took some amazing pics, especially what I call the Jungle Betty pics. They went to a wildlife amusement park kind of place, lots of pictures with animals, but these pictures are so amazing because, well, first of all, they're iconic, and they appear on anything you could imagine. They appear on posters. These pictures appear on postcards. There's been action figures made of Jungle Betty, and it's been emulated by many, many ever since. But these pictures are so great to me because they're so empowering. She was the queen of the jungle. She wasn't trying to be sexy. She was powerful and dominating, and she was in charge. And these pictures really, really made some waves. They rocketed her to even further stardom and helped Bunny out as well. They were published everywhere, pinup magazines, they were on record covers at the time, just everything. They also took some pictures on the beach, and some of these pictures just really, they're some of Betty's best. They really show her personality, her carefree attitude, just lovely, lovely stuff. Well, Bunny Yeager took one picture in particular that she submitted to a pretty new publication called Playboy. And in January 1955, Betty was a centerfold. That's not the whole picture. That was as big as it gets. I mean, even though Playboy was new, it was still a big deal, and being the centerfold in 1955 was a big deal. There's a documentary about Bunny Yeager, if you'd like to know more about her, called Naked Ambition. It just recently came out. I think it's on Netflix. It's really good. She's worth looking into on her own. She had a fascinating life. Well, everything was going great. She was on top of the world. She Playboy centerfold. What could go wrong? Tennessee Senator Estes Kefauver. Yeah. Well, I look at it as, well, he might have had he had good intentions, right? Well, he had just come off the success of the televised organized crime hearings. It was a big deal. It was appointment television. People would even go to movie theaters to watch these Senate hearings where he was trying to take down organized crime. Well, after that, he formed another Senate subcommittee, and he wanted to go after comic books and juvenile delinquency. Those pre-code comics, I'm sure you've seen them before, like Weird Science, the EC comics. They were pretty gnarly. They had some stuff, and they were marketed towards children, so he wanted to change that, and he did. He established the Comics Code. That's for, I don't know if they still do, but they used to have that approved by the Comics Code on the cover of every comic book. But those comics had depictions of women being tied up, tortured, that kind of stuff. So that kind of in Kefauver's mind, he thought, well, where do I go next? Irving Klaw. Who else was selling pictures of women being tied up and tortured? However, Irving Klaw was not selling or marketing those pictures to minors. So Kefauver had to find a way to get him. And he ended up getting him on U.S. Mailing charges because he considered it inappropriate material to be sent through the mail. He ended up issuing a subpoena for Klaw, but not just Irving Klaw. He subpoenaed Betty, and it scared her to death. And she had to go testify. Now, she didn't get called to the stand. She didn't have to testify, but imagine what it would be like sitting there all day waiting to see if you get called up. She felt ashamed for the first time in her life. She didn't think there was anything wrong with what she had done. Klaw did have to testify, and he remained under the microscope of the U.S. government for years, and he was finally charged in 1963, and he died soon thereafter from the stress of that. Let's talk about the mental toll that this had on Betty. She continued to work a little bit, but it wasn't the same. She was still getting published like crazy. There was so many thousands of pictures of her that had been taken, but things were definitely not the same. And then around this time, she disappeared. She left New York City. Where did she go? No one knew at the time. She was just not in New York City anymore. She wasn't answering calls for photography sessions, nothing like that. Well, she went to Florida, and she started leading a life of normality. She just got regular jobs. She got remarried. She found it enduring. And then something happened on New Year's Eve, 1958. She was walking on the beach by herself. She passed a church. They were having a New Year's Eve service. She went in and she had a full-blown religious experience, a total awakening. I talked about the notorious Bettie Page movie from 2005 earlier. It has a pretty good depiction of what I think that might have been like, according to how Betty described it later in life. So she began a life devoted to religion. Her first step in that new life was leaving her new husband. I see a pattern. And then she straight up just went to Bible school. She wanted to be a missionary, and they denied her because she had already been divorced. But from about 1959 until about 1963, 1964, she went to Bible schools. She worked with the Bible Institute of Los Angeles. She went to the Moody Bible Institute in Chicago. She worked for the Billy Graham Crusades for a while. Apparently, there's speculation that she met Billy Graham at some point. Imagine that. That's pretty wild. The queen of the pinups and evangelical.
Worked pretty well, actually.
Right. Here's her class picture from where she was at the Multnomah Bible College in Oregon. Now, she had been popular. She was popular in the 50s as a pinup model. But would anyone in her new circle recognize her? Because, you know, if she was in Bible class and some guy said, hey, you're Bettie Page, what would that say about them, right? So she stayed religious from then on. This wasn't a phase. And people said later in life they got to meet with her and talk with her that she knew the Bible front and back. In 1964, she returned to Nashville for a while. The reason being is her father had fallen very ill, and even though he had abused her and she probably didn't have high opinion of him, she felt responsible to help. So she went back to help out with her dad's illness. This is a picture of her with her family, Betty on the left, Edna Mae in the chair, Goldie, her sister, on the right, and that's her nephew, Ron Brim, in Edna Mae's lap. In '64, she re-enrolled at Peabody. She wanted to get a master's. There's her picture from the 1965 Peabody yearbook. I guess you could say that was her last published photo because it was published to an extent. I don't know how many they made of those. I have 2 of them. But during this time, you know, unbeknownst to her, pictures of her were still being printed in magazines. I mean, they never really stopped. And then also around this time, there was the development of mental struggles. The late 70s and the early 80s were some dark days. She moved back to Florida for a little while in '66. She married a man named Harry Lear. It didn't really work out. Around 72, she decided to go to Los Angeles, and that's where she would stay for the rest of her life. These mental struggles led to an incident in the late 70s with a landlord, a violent incident, and it got her diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic. She had to spend months in the Patton State Mental Hospital, and she was under supervision for years and years and years. Now, people love to bring this up, especially modern day, especially with Instagram and stuff like that. People love to make little videos like, oh, you like Bettie Page, she's a queen of pinups, but did you know this? And it's just one of those things where they love to show her mugshot, they love to talk about her mental struggles. And unfortunately, that's human nature for some people. It can't be really said for certain, of course, with anyone that gets paranoid schizophrenia, what caused it. But it's known, paranoid schizophrenia is known to be caused by stressful life events, especially traumatic childhood experiences. And she definitely had that. She was assaulted by her dad. She was assaulted by a group of men in Queens in New York. And let's face it, the stress of those Senate hearings, there's no telling what that would do to somebody's mental well-being. Being under the eye of the government like that, that stress, if I get a letter from the IRS, my heart starts racing. So I can't imagine what it would be like to have that target on you. Quick example of what the target of the government can do, during the Red Scare, 1951 or so, the House of Un-American Activities went after a lot of people, in particular John Garfield, the actor, and they ruined his life, ruined his career, and he died. He died the next year, 1939, stress-induced heart attack. And Irving Klaw, his untimely death in 1966. It's been said that was definitely stress-related too. I think that's all connected. But you know what? She overcame it. She received treatment, and she survived it. And I think that just goes to show the importance of mental health screening, mental health treatment, mental health counseling. She's a success example of that. So let's lighten the mood a little bit. And I'll talk about, around this time, the next, what I consider phase of her life, a Bettie Page revival started brewing in pop culture. She had no idea this was happening. It was a new generation that was rediscovering her work from couple decades earlier. Artists, people in the counterculture, musicians, punk rockers, new wave rockers, they liked Bettie Page because she looked modern and different, and they found her fascinating. She was also found fascinating to feminists. They found some of those pictures extremely liberating, especially the Bunny Yeager ones and the Claw ones. She was the total opposite of the June Cleaver model of the 1950s woman. Artists loved to draw and paint Bettie Page at this time. And people were fascinated about her whereabouts because there was nothing. So all these artists that were drawing and painting her, they were like, where is she? Is she still alive? She wouldn't be that old right now. Also around this time, a publication came out called A Nostalgic Look at Bettie Page. It was a pretty big seller. I believe that came out in '78. Private Peaks, there were volumes of this. It was really popular on the newsstands. But let's talk about the artists that started drawing and painting Bettie Page. One in particular, Robert Blue, he became very well known for his paintings of the Claw era. This is one of his paintings right here. I've never seen one in person. I've heard they're really striking in person. They were sold to high-end art collectors. They were in high-end art exhibitions in New York City, Los Angeles. It was just one of those things that if you were really keen to the high-end counterculture, you wanted a Robert Blue painting. Around this time, the artist simply known as Olivia started painting and drawing Bettie, and she still paints and draws her to this day. One of her most recognized is Nurse Bettie. Now, Bettie never did a picture like this, but you would think she had. That's how well that Olivia captured her essence. But most importantly, in the early 80s, Dave Stevens. Now, he'd been drawing Bettie and painting her, drawing her, most of his life. He'd been obsessed and fascinated with the idea of Bettie Page from a teenager. Now, he's credited for really transforming her into a pop culture icon because he came out with a comic book called The Rocketeer. Now in the Rocketeer, Cliff, the main character, his girlfriend was Betty. And it didn't just look like Bettie Page, it was Betty. She was named Betty. It was her. And it started like this comic book Betty fandom. People were finding out more and more about her through just word of mouth. Like, who is this person? Is she still alive? Like, what is this? Well, Stevens loved drawing her. Here's a still. You can just see how much that looks like her. That's from The Rocketeer right there. This is one of his most famous drawings of Betty, that he turned this into a really popular selling poster. He was a loving homage. Around this time, a lot of other people, especially in the comic book and merch industry, started making some material, some comic books, some like card decks, kind of seedy stuff. It didn't really come from the same respect that Stevens came from. So he stopped producing Betty material because he's like, well, no, if people are going to make money off of her, I don't know if she's still alive or not, is what he thought. So he stopped doing it around this time. In the late 80s, there were many fanzines that started coming out. This is one of the most popular ones, the Bettie Pages. And they were all asking the same questions. Where is she? What happened to her? In '89, there was a cover story in the LA Weekly in search of Bettie Page. It really made some waves, especially in Los Angeles. It made such waves that Entertainment Tonight did a nationwide piece on Betty. And they were asking the same question, where is she? Well, Betty saw that, and it was the first clue that what's going on? Why are these people looking at pictures of me? That was years ago. Nobody cares about me. Also around this time, early 90s, Tommy Goldsmith, I'm sure a lot of you know him, former Tennessean writer. He became really interested in the Betty story, and he made it a goal to find out if she was alive. And it didn't take him very long. He said in the E! True Hollywood Story, just a few phone calls, and he found her brother Jack, still living in Nashville. So he tells a story. He went to Jack's house, knocked on the door. Jack answered, "Are you Jack Page?" "Yeah." Is Bettie Page your sister?" "Yeah." "Is she still alive?" "Well, yeah, she lives in Los Angeles." And that was like just a big moment. That was the first time anyone had found out in pop culture that Bettie Page was still alive. So we can thank Tommy Goldsmith for that. Really, really cool. A serious buzz started up when that Tennessean article ran. And Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, they somehow found her. And they got her to do an audio interview for a segment on their show. I believe it was a phone interview. Now, Dave Stevens, the Rocketeer creator, he saw that and blew his mind. He's like, I gotta find her. I want to meet her. She's my muse. I gotta find her. And he did. Through some connections, Dave found her. He showed her how loved she was. He showed her all these materials that have been produced, these comic books. He showed her the Rocketeer stuff. There's a story where he took her to maybe a Tower Records, to the merch area, and just look at all this stuff with your picture on it. And she had no idea. And he was able to help her financially. He was able to help her capitalize on this new revival of her stuff. And apparently in 1993, also around this time, there was a art show in Nashville. It was the first international art extravaganza totally dedicated to Bettie Page. All I know about that is this image taken off a t-shirt. If anybody went to that or knows anything about it, please let me know. I'd love to hear more about it. It was at Marathon Village. I'm sure it was a bash. Well, Betty Mania was officially growing and growing and growing in pop culture. The band BR549 put out a song called Betty Betty. There were books, there were t-shirts, there were comics, there were new comics, there were posters, stickers, magnets, you name it, coffee mugs, shot glasses. If it could be produced, they put Betty on it. She was becoming a full-blown pop culture icon. Tattoos. People started getting tattoos of Bettie Page, especially women. They saw her as trailblazing, fearless, sexy, inspiring. So why would you not want that tattooed on your body? This new generation really appreciated her. Now, that didn't mean that she had to understand it, because she didn't. She told my friend Mark Morey in an interview in the early 2000s, he ended up producing the film Bettie Page Reveals All. It's a great documentary. She told him, "Why me? Like, why? What is it about me that all these young people like? She just did not understand it. And keep in mind, too, I don't know if I've mentioned this yet, but during this whole era where she was rediscovered, she did not want to be photographed. She would do audio interviews. She would write letters to people, but she wanted people to remember her the way she was. Now, fast forward to 2022. As a longtime fan, I had this idea that Nashville should formally recognize that Bettie was from here. So I pursued the idea of the historic marker. She met the qualifications. Her story was interesting. I thought it was a great part of Nashville's pop culture past, but I wasn't sure if it would get approved. So I mailed off a packet to the Historical Commission, and I put a little sticker of Bettie on there to get their attention. And I didn't realize at the time that you could just do this online. And I printed everything out and just did it old school style. And yeah, but the cool thing is I mailed this off on her birthday, April 22nd, 2022. I did that on purpose. They received it a couple of weeks later. They got in touch and they said, yeah, we're gonna vote on this, and it passed unanimously. And it got a lot of press. It freaked me out. It took me by surprise. I did not know that news reporters could get your phone number that easy, because the next morning my phone was blowing up and I was like, I didn't ask for this, but I rolled with it, and it was actually kind of fun. They were doing news stories outside of Hume Fog because that's where I wanted the marker to go, because I felt like that was the most significant Nashville location in her story. And on April 22nd, 2023, on her 100th birthday, oh, by the way, we had a yard sale to pay for the marker. The sponsor has to pay for the marker. And I just wanted to show everybody how awesome our yard sale was. Look at that yard sale. Isn't that great? And yes, that is an original Captain D's painting right there. It was also on the cover of the Tennessean. That really blew my mind. They did an interview. I did not know what's going to be on the cover. And the mayor declared the day, April 22nd, 2023, as Bettie Page Day in the city, and that's me with my goofy face. My favorite artist in the world, Mitch O'Connell, did the poster art. We made posters to advertise it, and he's a really respected artist. He's been drawing Bettie since the 80s. And after he delivered the poster to me, the file, I said, well, how much do we owe you? Because I know he's not cheap. And he said, you know what? This is a great thing. I'm doing it for free. Could not believe it. And here it is. On April 22nd, 2023, we dedicated the marker out right outside of Hume Fog. I think it looks so cool outside of Hume Fog. It was quite the day. And I'd like to read the marker to you. Bettie Mae Page, 1923 through 2008. One of 6 children, Bettie Mae Page graduated from Hume Fog High School in 1940 and George Peabody College 1944 before moving to New York to work as a model and actress. She became one of the most photographed pinup models of the 1950s and retired from public life in 1957. Page became an evangelical Christian and maintained a reclusive lifestyle, though she developed an underground cult following and was hailed as a feminist icon prior to her death in Los Angeles in 2008. Now, how many people can you say evangelical Christian, underground cult following, and feminist icon in the same sentence? There's only one, and that's Bettie Page. Nobody else, you can't say that. People came from all over the world. People came from all over the United States. Her family members came, cousins came, distant cousins. A guy from Italy came. It was crazy. Hundreds came. Biographers came. Her estate came. And I love this picture. This is the reveal. This is when we pulled the cover off. And this picture just, it's Bettie, the focus of the camera, once again, 70 years after her career. It's almost like the camera clubs, and that's them all trying to get the perfect shot. So it's one of my favorite pictures of all time. This is her nephew. You saw a picture of him earlier in Edna Mae's lap. This is him speaking at the dedication. Here's a picture of, let's see, from left to right. We got Michael Cobb, who produces Bettie Page wines. We got pinup queen Bernie Dexter. I was super nervous meeting her. You know who her idol is. And there's goofy old me, and on her right is her estate manager, Mark Rossler. And at the end of the night, we had a birthday cake, 100th birthday. Had a big party at Eastside Bowl. It was a really good time. Now, I'd like to do a little afterword here. This is an old insurance map. On the bottom, you have Broadway. Top, you got Commerce Street. So this is 7th Avenue right there. I got a copy of her birth certificate, and it's kind of elusive. It was tough to find. And on the birth certificate, it had her address of birth as 114 7th Avenue. And the red arrow is pointing to it. Now, here's an advertisement. 114 7th Avenue. This is from the mid-20s. 1 and 2 bedroom apartments with kitchenette. Apply at the Pie Wagon. So why is that significant? You've probably already figured that out. We had no idea when we dedicated the marker at Hume Fogg that literally right across the street, 113 7th Avenue North, was where the marker was. So on her 100th birthday, we didn't know it, but we dedicated a marker to her life directly across the street, one number away from the address that she was born at. Yeah, it was, when I found that out, it was pretty wild. In conclusion, she had a hard life, but she was strong and she became an inspiration. And she broke down crazy, rigid societal barriers in the modeling and fashion world. She became an icon. People love her story of self-made success. She's a survivor of mental health. I'm glad she was able to see what she became and how inspiring she became. And I think she was a real American original, and she's a pop culture phenomenon. And she's from Nashville, and we should all be proud of that. And that's all. Ma'am.
Ask for questions.
If anyone has any questions, I will do my best to answer them, and if I don't know the answer, I'll act like a politician and deflect. Yes?
I've got two questions. I'm interested in the subject because I've done a lot of research in life of Justice Kefauver. For one thing. The other thing is I've seen some of Irwin Klahl's films.
Mm.
And at least two questions. First of all, how did she make any money off of this renewed interest?
Yes. Yes, she made, once Dave Stevens, when he met up with her, he started the process. Well, she eventually got a agent, a representative, and they started copywriting things. This would have been around 93, I believe, 94. I believe her agent's last name was Swanson. She worked with him for a while, and she started making money, and then she eventually got represented by CMG, who her estate is still represented by. So the last years of her life were comfortable.
The other thing is the movie, Notorious Bettie Page, I saw it for the second time recently. It begins with Kefauver here. David Strathairn, an excellent actor, played him very well, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And although they never mention his name, but that's who he's playing. But she gets called, but never actually appears as a witness.
Right.
And I'm just curious about that. Do you know anything like that?
You know, I've never really heard anybody for definite who maybe has access to the hearings know why they didn't call her to the stand. Maybe they just felt that it wasn't necessary because they grilled Klahl so hard, you know. It's really uncertain as to why they made her sit there all day and then didn't call her to the stand. It's just
I was
uncertain.
a little surprised that she, when a black man asked her to do the photos, that she agreed to it. I mean, she must have been very open-minded.
She was very open-minded, and she actually says that later in life. She's like, "There's nothing wrong with that. You know, people are people." And so,
Was she living in a trailer court at the end? Toward the end?
at the end of her life.
Yeah.
Now I'm not sure about that. I don't know if she lived in a trailer court or an apartment. I've heard apartment, but I'm not really exactly sure. Yes.
I was going to say, this is your first time speaking in front of a group. You did a pretty good job.
Are you serious? Well, thank you. Maybe I can make a career move or something. Maybe because I enjoy doing it. I wouldn't mind doing it again.
Who came up with the text for the marker? Was that you or the historical?
It was a combination of both. I submitted what I wanted it to say, and then they deliberated on that. They added some things. They took some things out. I really wanted it to say that she graduated salutatorian, but it just took up too many characters. I really wanted it to say Queen of Pinups on it, and it didn't. So it was a combination of both. They kind of came up with what they liked, and of course at that time they could have had it say anything, and I would have been like, "Yeah, let's do it," because I was so excited that it was happening. But it was really cool. Yes, sir.
This is just an observation, but if intellectual property law, copyright law, legal protections, branding protections, and business then that they have now,
Right.
she would have been a billionaire.
You're right. Absolutely right about
She would
that.
have been, she was the Madonna of her time.
You're absolutely right. And she is one of the most bootlegged figures of all time.
Yeah.
Just if you can look on eBay at some of the stuff that came out in the 80s and 90s, that's absolutely insane. Spelled her name all manner of different ways. Betty with a Y, Page like Paige. Everything. But you're absolutely right about that. Yeah.
I'd like to reiterate what was said, that you should do this a lot. You're very kind to this woman, and your fascination with her is so based on your research. It's really impressive.
Well, thank you very much.
I've never expected this today.
Thank you very much. That means an awful lot to me. I appreciate it.
And in your comments, wondering why she did not testify at
Mhm.
the hearing, it would be my presumption that most of those things, a lot of them had to deal with theater, and a lot of the older white men wanted to control witnesses, and when you had a strong female who saw nothing wrong with what she was doing, that would not be a good witness to grill, because she would come right back, because she was being the one photographed and being the one being the subject, and so they would probably get in trouble with the grilling, because she would likely have spat right back, what's wrong with it?
That right there.
Demonstrate, so.
You're absolutely right.
So, they had her sitting all day, but that would be my presumption.
That very good. I agree. Totally agree. Absolutely. Yes.
Can we look forward to some more celebrations?
You know, we have talked. So since all this happened, I have got involved with some of her biographers, with Mark Morey, the director of her documentary, and we've talked about having another Bettie Page celebration on her birthday. Maybe I think we will. We were talking about doing it a couple of years ago, and it just kind of fell through the cracks. But that's a great idea. I think.
Man, that I didn't know this one.
Yeah, we tried to get the word out as much as we could, and it got a little bit of press, and it was a great turnout. It was way more than I thought it would be, and it was. I'll tell you what. By the end of that day, I was sleepwalking. I didn't even know from a hole in the ground, because I'd been going all day on that day, and by the ride home, I fell asleep. I wasn't driving, but you know. Yes, sir.
What did you think of Karen Essex's biography?
So I liked that book. They did the best with the information they had at the time, and it was actually Essex and her agent Swanson that put it out. I think it's a pretty good book. There's a few things that they got wrong here and there, but I think it's just a very good basic story of her life. They got the timeline right. They got the facts right. And if you yes.
Karen's an acquaintance of mine.
Oh, cool.
Didn't she actually meet Bettie Page at some
I think she did. I think she said that on the E! True Hollywood Story, which is on YouTube. Yeah, I would love to. I don't know if she's still really interested in the Betty story. I think I tried to contact her about coming out to the Marco dedication. I couldn't get a hold of her, but yeah, really cool.
She lives in New Orleans.
Oh, cool, awesome.
I'm wondering if KDK had something to do with that celebration at Maryside Village.
You know, you're probably right, because I used to go to the KDK's ranch dressing clothing store.
And so many of her models had the Bettie Page look.
Mm-hmm.
They carried that kind of clothing.
That's a great idea. I could see if I could find her.
She still has a house here on Gale Lane, I think, but she's in Detroit a lot.
Okay.
She's got property up there.
Cool.
Where did she die, and where is she buried?
She's buried in Los Angeles. I'm not sure which cemetery. It's not Hollywood Forever, I don't think.
Is
She,
there a marker?
yeah, it's a very modest marker, just very basic, but it's there. She died in Los Angeles at the hospital, and yeah, that's where she's buried.